Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome, literary friends and family, as you are streaming into our Zoom chat and our Facebook feed for Last Lap. Today is the last lap of the BCLF. All right, so we're playing some music, just a little vibes, you know, as everybody gets settled in. Grab a drink, grab your little peanut punch, whatever, you know, whatever to feel comfortable today as we convene for the last time. Again, this is like Carnival Tuesday, as BCLF has said, last lap. We'll be back shortly, just a few moments. Catch your vibes, share the Facebook link, all right? Spread the love. We're getting ready to get started in a few minutes. All right. I feel I should do this session with a little headpiece on today because it is last lap of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. So welcome, welcome again to our friends and family from across the globe who has come on this journey with us and is here to take it home today. My name is Nicole Grimes and I am the super host on behalf of BCLF. And it's been a pleasure to be here with you for the final day. This is day 4 as we close out our festivities today. So if you don't know, BCLF is a movement, dedicated to the Caribbean storyteller. The festival specifically aims to basically unite new and younger readers and overall just celebrate the beauty and the depth and the richness that is Caribbean culture. So, over the past 3 days, the celebration has been in full effect. If you missed it, sorry, I don't know what to tell you, but lucky for you, we have all those live recordings still on Facebook and will be available on YouTube. But we have convened over 35 esteemed authors from across the globe. We've had people join us from Europe, North America, all down through the Caribbean. And our viewers, we're so happy to have you. You have been tuned in from Germany, London, Belize, Guyana, all over the place, all kind of time zones. So we're so grateful. And today we continue the cerebral vibes. Today's final event is entitled Flame to Fire. It's a special edition where we're going to be unpacking the use of Creole in the Caribbean story. Now, we're continuing to wait for more and more guests to file in, of course, but in the meantime, please say hello, drop a location where you're hailing us from, what island or islands you're representing, and of course, just spread the link, spread that Facebook link. Tell everybody this is the only place to be right now on this beautiful Sunday. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, New York. So, before I get into specifics and introduce our fantastic lineup of talent today, just get through a couple of few little housekeeping things, all right? Number one, this event is going to run for about 75 minutes. So again, like I say, get comfortable, right? So it's going to be cool. It's going to go by. You're going to want more. Trust me, you're going to want more. Feel free to submit any questions or comments, of course, you have in the chat. Myself and the BCLF team will be combing Facebook and Zoom and trying to ensure that our incredible host, gets word and is able to hopefully, shoot some of those questions to our panelists. And of course, make sure you keep the dialogue going. I want to see that chat scroll on Facebook from the love and the dialogue amongst each other. All right, so let's get down to business and introduce our panel who is going to take us on a journey this evening, the last lap journey, that is. So we welcome first, thank you for being here, Ms. Patricia Powell. Patricia is an energy medicine practitioner and a professor of literature and creative writing at Mills College in Oakland, California. She's an award-winning author of several works, including Me Dying Trial, A Small Gathering of Bones, The Pagoda, and The Fullness of Everything. Her novels are regularly taught in universities and courses on Caribbean, lesbian and gay, and Asian diaspora literatures. Her latest work in progress, Bamyard, is about a woman reclaiming her African spiritual legacy. Patricia, we welcome you to BCLF today. Next up, we have the lovely Katia de Ulysse. She's a Haitian American fiction writer born in Haiti. She received a Master's of Arts from Notre Dame of Maryland University. Her short stories, essays, and pushcart nominated poetry have appeared in numerous anthologies and literary journals, including The Caribbean Writer, Rumpus, The Hong Kong Review, Haiti Noir, Calabash, among others. Her novel, Mouths Don't Speak, was listed as one of the most anticipated fiction books of 2018. She has also written 2 bilingual children's books, Fabiola Can Count and Fabiola Goes to School. She joins us today from Maryland, where she continues her work being a huge advocate for immigrant families in the Baltimore area. Welcome, Katia.
Thank you, Nicole.
We welcome Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi there.
Elizabeth is a proud child of Guyanese immigrants and a New York-based award-winning author and lawyer with work published across a spectrum of print and digital media. To date, she has published fiction, nonfiction, legal commentary, poetry, and comedy. Her writing has appeared in the Huffington Post, the Higgs Weldon, Brown Girl Magazine, Silent Magazine, Pre-Lit Magazine, and many, many, many others. Her first book, Trauma, a collection of short stories, placed in the 2018 Best Book Awards and was noted in distinction in the 2018 Royal Dragonfly Book Club, a book award, for women's literature. Her first children's book, Nothing You Could Do, will be published by Brookout Media in 2020. Elizabeth, we welcome you.
Thank you so much.
Next up, we have Cardella Forbes, who joins us proudly representing Jamaica. She is the author of 5 critically acclaimed works of fiction: Songs of Silence, Flying with Icarus and Other Stories, A Permanent Freedom, Ghost, and her most recent novel, A Tall History of Sugar, which was longlisted for the Bocas Literary Prize. Her short fiction has appeared in major journals and in anthologies. In 2008, she was honored by BIM magazine for her work as a Caribbean woman writer. She is currently a professor of Caribbean literature at Howard University and resides in Maryland, from where she joins us today. Welcome, Cardella. Next up, I tell us, real bright people here today. Well, they're real bright people. Next up, we have Kai Miller. Kai
Miller.
Poet, writer, and might I add, wickedly entertaining Facebook commentator who represents Kingston, Jamaica proudly. He studied English at the University of the West Indies and moved to England, where he earned an MA in creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan University in 2004. He's published 5 books of poetry, beginning with Kingdom of Empty Bellies, 1 collection of short stories, 3 novels, 1 book of essays, and an edited anthology entitled New Caribbean Poetry. His work has won important awards, including the Forward Prize in 2014 for the Hartford Tries to Map a Way to Zion. He teaches creative writing at the University of Glasgow. He lives in London, I believe, for where he's joining us today. So welcome, Kai.
Hi, how you guys doing?
A pleasure. And we have one more. We have a special guest today. We are welcoming Hadassah K. Williams, the first recipient of the 2020 BCLF Elizabeth Nunez Award for Writers in the Caribbean. Hadassah is a writer from Trinidad and Tobago, from where she joins us. She is a proud mentee of Earl Lovelace and Monique Roffey. Her work can be found in Moco Magazine for Caribbean Arts and Letters and Interviewing the Caribbean Magazine. Her story, Cascadeur, was published in PCAST Press speculative fiction anthology entitled New Worlds, Old Ways. In 2019, she was awarded a scholarship to attend the Faber and Faber Academy and has had the privilege of being featured on the Bocas Lit Fest program. Proud Celti, as she says, Hadassah is patiently waiting for beaches to reopen, we all are, while burning through her to-read pile and working on her first novel. Hadassah, we're so pleased to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
And this extremely talented lineup, everybody, is going to be stewarded by our incomparable host today, the Nayat Lee. So let me share with you a little bit about Nayat. Nayat is a current doctoral candidate at the University of Maryland, researching rhetorics of race. As an instructor, she teaches public speaking and the rhetoric of Black America to undergraduates in the UMD Communications Department. Before returning to academia 5 years ago, she spent 15 years working as a print and TV journalist, advertising strategist, and copywriter, speechwriter, and corporate communications specialist in Trinidad and Tobago. She is the University of Maryland's 2017 Flagship Fellow and 2003 winner of the University of the West Indies History Department's Eric Williams Prize for Excellence in Capitalism and Slavery. She also currently lives in Maryland, from where she joins us today and will lead our engaging talk with these amazing writers. So literary family, again, thank you for being here, and we're about to get the vibe started. So I turn the floor over to our amazing event host, the lovely Nayat Lee.
Thanks, Nicole. You made me sound really good. And so like next to these people who sound so much more awesome, I'm really happy.
But that's my job. That's my job, darling.
You really went in for this last one. It's a real last lap. You made sure to put all the feathers and beads on. And, we're really grateful for your presence throughout the entire festival. I've been watching you, and, it's great to have you here. I think everyone agrees that you really do bring the vibes every single time. So thanks a million for that.
Thank you, ladies. It's all yours. Take it away.
Ladies and Kai. Ladies and Kai. All right, so it's wonderful to be here. I just want to say that I am completely honored. I am dwarfed by many of the people I'll be talking to today. I have looked at the literature, I have known the names, and today, listening to the bios, I just got a little bit nervous because I'm not sure I have the kind of questions that you will be equipped to answer, but we're going to go forward anyway. I have been fortified with a beverage. Everyone else has a beverage, even if it's water. I see Katia. Katia, what are you having?
Water. At least that's
What-
what we call it.
Kai, what about you?
That's what we call it now during COVID.
Kai, what do you have? Because I saw you reach over to get something.
No, I'm part of the water crew.
Oh, this is the captain of the ship, the only one drinking. But anyway, it's really wonderful to have you guys here. And, when I first got invited to do this, I, thought about Flame to Fire for a really, really long time. And as transplants, except with the exception of Hadassah, of course, we kind of all know what it means to be a Caribbean person outside of the Caribbean and the complexity of that. And so much later on, I want to talk about how that influences your process. But first, I want to just give you a brief interpretation of what I think, Flame to Fire, nation language, what we're talking about today. So the idea of love and resistance for me as a Caribbean person outside of Trinidad and Tobago is about how I perceive myself, how I perceive my culture, how I perceive my place in the world in this particularly difficult time, and the resistance that I face sometimes to what I think that self-love should be. And so when I, as a reader, pick up a book like Mouths Don't Speak, or when I pick up something else, I am able to hear myself in those chapters, in those pages, and it reinforces what I think about myself. And it also tells people who might not be like me what they should think about me. And so I know you know this, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it bears repeating. You serve a function that really is indispensable. But nation language is a concept that has many parts. And so what I want to do, first of all, is to just throw out sort of a definition of what it is so that we can all figure out if we're on the same page when we talk about nation language. And so the definition from Brathwaite basically is that, and I have to put on my glasses because as we discussed in the green room, I'm advancing in years and I can't really see so good without them. But he says we have also what is called nation language, which is the kind of English spoken by the people who were brought to the Caribbean, not the official English now, but the language of slaves and laborers, the servants who were brought in, right? So that definition of nation language is not complete, but is that what we're talking about? I'm going to throw this question out to everyone. Do you feel like your writing pushes past that definition in terms of using Creole? Or do you think that your work fits into that definition? We can start with, anyone who might have thought about this before. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody and I'm going to go with Katia because she's smiling at me. I think you might be muted. I think you might be muted. Still muted.
I think all of our panelists, we could go ahead and have you guys unmute. We know we want like nice little dialogue back and forth, so don't be afraid. You could go ahead and unmute.
Yeah.
So that we could have a nice little discourse happening. But I'm gonna mute myself.
Elizabeth, you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Yeah. You want to respond to the question. So do you think that really, when you are identified as a Caribbean writer, and Katia just unmuted as well, so we'll go right back to her when we're done here. When you talk about you as a Caribbean writer, does your work fit into that definition of just just the language that was spoken by laborers and servants, the language that is outside of the lexicon?
I think for my body of work, it certainly fits into that definition, especially in that my collection of stories was largely rooted in certain historical contexts that were appended to each short story. I had these kind of nonfiction reference sections after to kind of explain situationally what the themes of each story were. And I think that was important because it also tied into a lot of the verbiage used in the stories and dialogue, in that, you know, I speak about being slave descendant and being indentured descendant, and it does tie into language in a lot of proverbs and adages and things of that nature. So I think for the purposes of my limited body of work, I know everyone else here has such a expansive list of work that they might disagree in how it manifests in other texts, but as far as how it's been used thus far in my work, it certainly fits pretty neatly into that definition.
Katia, you were going to respond?
Yes, let me unmute myself. That was just so lucky that everything didn't work out for a minute. So that gave me a little bit of time to think. That was just perfect. Being a Haitian person, you know, Creole is in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
That's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, when I'm asked to count something in English, in my brain, I have to do it in Creole first.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm writing, it's almost unnatural to do it in English. So it has to traverse, like from this, or traverse, as they say in English, and I'm thinking traverse, right? From this realm to another place in order for me to get those words down in English. So I operate spiritually in Creole. I don't know if that means anything.
Yeah, no, it means something. It makes sense to me. And I think, you know, I just wrote a question down when the bios were being read to ask Patricia about, you know, the African spiritual legacy of the character in her new book, because I have a feeling that person might speak a little differently in the text. And so Elizabeth says that it's her dialogue mainly, but then you're saying that it's the way you think. So my question to you again, Katia, and I'm going to get to everybody else, don't worry about it. But what do you think the difference is between the way that you think and the way that you write? How would you approach situations differently? So you're asked to speak, I just want to clarify, you asked to count and you eventually count in English, but you've thought it through in Creole, right? You can't help yourself, right? So what do you sound like when you're forced to speak in English? How is that person's thinking different to the person who would have just expressed it in Creole to start?
Well, I have to base that on the reaction that I get from other people when they say, "What did you say?" Say that again, because it has to do with a matter of place and context and where I am. And it's almost like playing a role.
Right.
You know, I can play being the immigrant in America in this, you know, classroom, wherever. I'm just going to play that part. Mm-hmm. But when I'm back to home and I'm back to me, it's all of that stuff. Like you said, feathers and beads. I guess that's what those other languages are to me, feathers and beads. When I pluck all those things off, I'm me, Creole.
I can certainly relate to that. I think, although I've grown up here, using, that nation language in my writing and interspersing it with, for lack of a better term, proper lexical language, it actually came natural for the same reason. So why it might be, it's interesting. It was actually easier for me because of just the daily task of code switching, right? And like you said, Katya, I relate to that so much, where you say when you come home and it's like everything comes off. I always say that speaking that way is almost like undressing for me. I feel so much more relaxed when I'm home. The shoulders are down. We got to eat. Like that kind of thing. It's just so much easier. And I mean, in the times of COVID, it's much harder now, right? Because now we're working from home, and now it's like I can't compartmentalize code switching. It's on one second, I'm telling a client, yes, please hold, and then it's like immediately do so. And it's getting more difficult, but I can completely relate to the idea of playing a role and having to switch between those roles, and one of those roles feeling more intimate than the other. I don't know if they lost me.
But, you know, Katya talked about context and speaking appropriately in context. But to those of us who publish books, we feel as though publication, the book, the body of work is in fact the playground of the writer, that you can decide what that context is, that you can speak any way you want to, you can write any way you want to. Has that been your publishing experience? Do you feel like you get to determine the context and how you get to speak when you write? And is there resistance to nation language in your process? Patricia is like, I could see her mouth moving, she's ready.
No, the questions that you're asking and all the responses are bringing up so many different things. You know, like I was thinking about how the way that I write, like I write in bed, I write lying down, and I feel as if because I write that way, I'm always closer to the people that I'm writing about. And so I feel closer to that language. It's very different when I sit up to write, because I sit up to write for school, for my work. But when I'm doing creative writing, I'm sort of a little closer to the unconscious, a little closer to my early years in the Caribbean. And so I feel as if the language comes more easily that way. The other thing I was thinking about was how my early novels were very much written in dialect or some version of dialect, and how that has changed over the years. But even when I read my work, even the most recent work, even though it's not in dialect so much, the dialect is all over it, you know, in the way that it sounds, in the way that the sentences are shaped, even if I'm not using DESE to represent THESE, you know? And so I don't know if that answers any of your questions, but I just find it interesting how the language moves and changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
And how it changes too, whether you're sitting up or you're lying down, at least for me.
So when I looked at the fullness of everything and I thought through what could I possibly ask you about this, one of the things that stood out to me, and I meant to do this much later on, but you know what, let's just go with it, okay? So in chapter 24, you talk about the assault of, well, it is after the assault of a young girl, right? And she's with her granny. And I'm reading about Granny. I'm reading your account of it. And Granny is my granny in your chapter. And I was reflecting on, I mean, every reader comes to the book with their own images in their head, and then they overlay things as they see fit so that they can make it real to them. But I did not need to do that, because your granny cinches the waist of her duster, and you call it a duster, right? And then Granny says to her, ball it out. And then Granny says other things that are quintessential Granny generally, but also my granny too. And so when you talk about being close to the character, when you are laying there writing, how this character, who is not necessarily speaking, as Elizabeth says, in any kind of dialect, and we're not using dialect today, but any kind of dialect, it is actually storytelling that, while it is not in dialect, it has a rhythm that reminds me of my grandmother. I don't know how you did it. I don't know what kind of obia it is, but you did it, right? And so I'm trying to figure out do you stitch together your grannies? Do you stitch together other people's grannies? Or did you write the motion of this woman? I mean, when you said, where is it? I'm looking for it while I'm talking to you here, but basically you say that she's an old woman not long for this world. She turns the key in the door behind them. She shuffles into the kitchen, drawing the duster tight around her waist. She boils a pan of hot water on the stove. That sequence of things is something I have seen my grandmother do, right? And she called it her duster. She didn't call it her bathrobe. She didn't call it her dressing gown. She called it her duster. And that just evokes so much. So do you stitch together other people's grannies and your grannies? Or did you write this woman's motion from scratch? And did you write it like that because you were lying down?
Very good question. I think maybe when I'm lying down, I can hear the collective grannies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I was also thinking about how when I first started writing, I wrote in dialect, and then I was told when I tried to send it out that nobody would read it, you know, and then I had to find ways to water it down and to sort of clean it up. And I've gotten to this place now where I feel really comfortable with writing it so that if you're familiar with it, you can hear it, but you don't necessarily see it. I don't know if that makes any sense, you know? And so I feel very comfortable with that way of doing it. But I think also though, in that space where I am restful and not very alert, it's easy to get to the collective grannies.
Mm-hmm. Because collective grannies reside in a place that, yeah.
But collective grannies reside in me, I guess.
All right, so I'm gonna move forward from this line of questioning, because one of the quotes is that the hurricane, the hurricane does not roar in pentameters. And I'm thinking about poetry, and I'm looking at Kai's face, and I just want to tell a little story before we move forward. So we were at the Boca Lit Fest a couple of years ago, maybe 2013 or 2014. And there was a table of people. I was doing something very similar to what I'm doing now. And there was a table of people who we took up residence at a table, and we began to drink. And we drank and we drank and we stayed. I mean, we really pushed the boundaries of what these people expected their reception would be. And the last people standing, I'm proud to say I was among them. The other Marlon James, the photographer, not the writer, was among them. And there was also Mr. Kai Miller among them. And he stood up to that rum and that wine and whatever we could get, like a true champion. And I'm sorry that you weren't in the green room earlier, so I can remind you of that's where I know you from and that's where you know me from, right? But it was maybe 4 o'clock in the morning when we decided to take it from the reception to the Cape Park Hotel. So as a poet sitting here, right? My question is, do you have in your mind the fact that the hurricane, the Caribbean phenomenon, the tropical phenomenon does not roar in pentameters when you're writing? Or is it just you that does that? Do you think it through? Do you think this is how I must present my ideas, or does it just happen naturally?
Oh, wow. The thing in terms of different genres. Yes, I do think about how to break meter, but let's just go back a little just for me, and first thinking as a fiction writer and thinking through the question. You see, though I understand like the concepts of nation language and dialect, blah, 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 I don't think I approach the work with these questions in mind. And I guess it's because I understand what's at the heart of Brathwaite. So Brathwaite resisted this idea of dialect and preferred nation language because that was about dignity. Now, I'm not as resistant as Brathwaite, though I understand what Brathwaite is saying, but I guess what Brathwaite was getting at was that nation language, it didn't have the kind of pejorative feel that the word dialect did.
Yes.
But you see, in my mind, English, if we're, just to talk about that one language, I don't know how, you can tell me about the French situation, Katia, But English I just see as this one big umbrella group, and the Queen's English is a dialect of English. You know, every version of English is a dialect to me, and there is no lack of dignity in dialect. We all write in different dialects. But I guess what I get from Brathwaite is that language is about dignity. And I think that's what I think through more when I write. When I'm writing and when I'm thinking about the sounds or what this character should say, I guess fundamentally I'm asking, what does your dignity look like? What does it sound like? How do I dignify you with words? And so the question of dignity is a bigger question to me than framing it as nation language or dialect or Creole. It's just about your dignity sounds particular to you, and I have to give you that on the page. And I guess with poetry, because that's what you're asking, it probably slightly different, that I do think about, I do think about the rhythms of the Caribbean. I guess, you know, the cartographer tries to map away design was all about how do you break certain meters. Like very literally, it's a book about mapping. So it's a book about how do you set down a metric understanding of a landscape? And that's obviously a metaphor for poetry. And so, yeah, I guess I do think about it, but in very technical and boring ways.
Yeah, so you talk about dignity. You know, one of the things that occurs to me a lot as a person of color living in the United States, and I know that you know, when I heard the bio and Katia works with immigrant families, that was one. I was like, okay, maybe she's a person who could feel this question, but it's a general question. You know, anyone can answer. As a person of color living in the United States, living outside of the Caribbean, as a Caribbean person living outside of the Caribbean, I find myself sort of embroiled in the struggles of Black Americans a lot, right? Because the nuance of my heritage and my identity that I had in Trinidad, she might be a Douglas, wonder who her father and mother are, goes to shit, right? When I come here, I'm a Black American first and foremost, that's it, nobody cares, okay? So I then find myself in conversations where I become a Black American representative, whether I like it or not. But I do know that because of how I speak at home, because of how I see the world as a result of how I speak, I can see nuance that people here might not be able to see. I don't get pulled from Republican to Democrat in the same way. I don't get pulled from black and white in the same way. There are things that happen in between there that are a product of me growing up in the Caribbean, as mixed up as it is. So my question is, do you think about the role that the way we speak and your writing of the way we speak can play in helping to resolve the kinds of issues that people who do not have that, I mean, they have their own literary resources, but Bob Marley is, for example, Bob Marley's music turns up in every major revolutionary situation in the world. The Berlin Wall is coming down, Bob Marley is there, right? Black Lives Matter, Bob Marley is there. In the same way, do you think there's a place for nation language as a new way of looking at situations that other people might not have the resources to do? I'll give you all a minute because I know that was from left field.
I'm going to nominate Cardella to answer.
Yeah, I was actually thinking I should nominate myself at this point. Yeah, well, the thing is that when I think about Brathwaite's idea of nation language, I think I don't really think he was necessarily talking about Creole. He actually gives examples of his own work written in English, you know, which is nation language. It's part of what Kai said about giving people their dignity. But also he's talking about get the sense of not just the content of what you write, but also their language sounding like them, as it were, you know, and not a caricature or something like that. And when I sit down to write, I honestly don't think a lot about the politics of it. I think it has a political effect for readers, you know, because of the response I get. Well, what I'm really interested in is how to make the character, to make the world of the characters that I'm presenting feel real, authentic, and I love the word Kai used, dignified. I write in both English and Creole. I'm always interested when people tell me like a tall history of sugar is written in Creole because it's written mainly in English. But I write a lot with my ear, and I have to hear, sometimes my narrator will switch. You know, I think a lot about how it was, the rhythms will come across, but I don't make a big effort to make it look like Creole on the page. It's very English orthography, so on, because once you start reading it, you realize that you have to hear it, even if it's unfamiliar to you, that you're dealing with a different, you know, way of speaking English. That's when I do Creole, you know, but even when I do English, I think it has a rhythm. I hope it has the rhythms and the, you know, the sounds and the world really of the people I am seeking to you know, talk about. I think that, yeah, the United States is an interesting place. It's a place where we all who come here enter into different kinds of identities that are conferred on us or forced on us. And we also realize that there are allegiances that we have to make automatically as people of color in a country like this, especially now. But I've never really thought that I had to speak a particular way or make a particular statement. I try to sort of get away from what I call a sort of ethic of opposition and reply, where, you know, how I utter, you know, has to do with people saying you're not so or you're not so. I just think that I try to exist in a place where I just be, and you know, you sort of take it or leave it. Very often people don't take it, they get really upset, but that's the problem is theirs, not mine, really. So yeah, I really, you know, somebody asked me this question about Creole once, and I said, yeah, it's political, and then I was mad with myself afterwards, because I think I was speaking more as a reader than the writer. I really am writing to represent what, you know, as authentically as I can.
So there are ways in which I think readers, and I think I was told that I was given some feedback. I'm not sure. So if it's difficult to hear, just let me know and I can repeat myself, right? There are ways in which readers from the diaspora read as a kind of high context culture. We read together, read your work so that we can feel at home. Yeah, it is a resource for us. It's sustenance for us, right? To be reminded of where we come from, to be told what is happening, to think through the things we experience in a way that we're comfortable with. And so I don't know if you all know who Jessica Krug is. Is everybody familiar with who Jessica Krug is? I see Elizabeth smiling. Yeah, Pat is not. Patricia, sorry, I called you Pat. My God. Patricia is not. But basically, for those who don't know, Jessica Krug is a white woman who was wandering around the United States as a Black woman, very much like Rachel Dolezal, and adopting Black identity. She was actually a professor at GW of African Studies, no less. And she was basically found out. And when she didn't, you know, when she realized things weren't going to go her way, she wrote this long article, you know, mea culpa. And they realized that she was actually a fraud. The word's kind of fraud. But one of her identities was actually, you know, Caribbean Bronx. That's what she called herself. You know, she put on an accent. She did whatever she had to do to dress to make herself appear to be having Caribbean heritage and being from the Bronx. I believe she's from Wisconsin and she's Jewish. Anyway, could Jessica understand in the way that I understand nation language? And could nation language be a way in which Caribbean people speak around characters like Jessica? Do you think that as much as you want to write for a much wider audience and you want everyone to read your work and you want to introduce people to the Caribbean, do you think that in a way you write for your own people using this rhythm, using this language, because you know it's like a secret drum that the Jessica Krugs of the world can't, and Katya disagrees, so go for it, Katya. Tell me I'm wrong. And Cordella disagrees too, I love it.
Let me unmute myself. When you said it's a secret drum, that's what hit me. And I'm looking at Hadassah, I'm looking at Cordella Forbes, and I'm looking at Patricia, I'm looking at everybody. I'm looking at the painting behind Cordella's, head. And those are the secret drums. You see yourself, all I see is this much of the painting behind Miss Forbes' head, but that's the secret drum. And, for a long time in this country, to even using the word drum, the drum was outlawed because we speak through the drum. And so that's a language in itself that's generations and it's in our blood. Not everybody can hear it. They can bring it and bang it right in your eardrum, but you're just not gonna quite get it. And sorry to get a little too passionate about that, but when you said the secret drum, that's where I went like that. Yeah. It was outlawed for a reason. It was outlawed for a reason. And Miss Cordella Forbes, I want to know about that painting right behind your head right there. Is it Haitian? Is it? I can't, we can't hear you.
You need to unmute Cordella. Yeah, go ahead.
You see me now, you see with this technology, tells you my age. Yeah, I bought it in the Dominican Republic from a Haitian painter on the street. Yes. Yes, go ahead, Katya.
You don't want me to.
yeah, go on. and there is a whole, there's a whole story behind that, which is very uneasy, which we can talk about after. Okay, just letting you know. All right.
It's a beautiful painting, and I see that painting, and I can hear the drums in that painting.
Yes.
I hear the drums in all your faces. I see Miss Williams over here. I hear the drums and the way her hair is done. I look at Patricia. I just, oh my goodness. This, it's music.
Yes.
We are music.
Yes.
Each of us, a voice, an instrument, and this one piece of this glorious piece of music, even right here in Baltimore, Maryland. Oh, I'm gonna mute myself now.
So you talk about the music, and one of the ways in which, as I've tried to read about nation language coming up to this, is that it's closely associated with Africanness. But the Caribbean is not just Africa, right? Our canon clearly, is not just African. So if we're talking about the rhythm of the language, and we're thinking Africanness, where do we add in all those other pieces? How do we account for the people who aren't? How do we account for everyone else?
Well, language moves, doesn't it? I mean, you even just look at what the how the young people change the language every day. If there's something that you need to say that isn't there as yet, you just invent the word and it keeps moving. And so it's, language is as much a product of all the people who were there and all the generations and all the experiences as any other language. I don't think that, it's just, I tend to think more of Caribbean, rather than African, in that way. And I always think about the influences are there. The African influence is very strong. But I always think about I always imagine these scenarios where somebody from West Africa would come to Jamaica and just making food, and they say, oh, that's not how it's done, or, go to Trinidad and somebody is making, Indian food and say, well, that's not Indian food, it's gone through all these sea changes, these various passages and so on. But to your question about Miss Krug, I know to me there are two things there, three things probably. Obviously, you can't know any language in the way the people who are born into the language know it, because language is a culture, it carries also experiences. But the other day, my 6-year-old said to me, I have 3 wishes. My first wish is that the COVID-19 would go away. My second wish is that all the people of the world could speak and understand each other's language. And the other is that we had a backyard, big backyard. And I'm thinking of this big backyard and this whole thing of, I don't know, how do you translate the world into any language? That always has to happen, I think, And, we're always, I lost my Spanish. I wish I still had it, but, these are different windows. I think Miss Krug's situation is an interesting one. And I'm not, I'm not saying that she should have done this impersonation. You want to know the danger of that. Suppose she had been in politics and Joe Biden had chosen her as his running mate, then you realize what you're looking at. But I'm always intrigued by motivation as a writer. And I think the thing that I keep thinking about is, what is the deep dislocation? What is the deep sense of need that made her feel she had to do that? So I'm thinking I might actually try to enter the territory of that particular territory in my imagination and maybe write a novel about something like that, So it's very interesting how the way I speak my language is always going to be different from the way somebody who has been born into it speaks. But I think language is enormously expansive and generous, and it acquires these different dimensions. We have this whole continuum in Jamaica. I switch between English and various kinds of Creole all the time, but that was a very much imposed language, and we perform in it too when we're ready. What you said in a way, what you were talking about, I think is part of that performance. You use it to do all sorts of things.
Yeah. Katya.
I'll unmute myself. I just have to say this as part of that secret drum language. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Part of secret drum language, we do it with our mouth, with our throats. When you say oh, we're speaking. And those of us who know that, we know what we mean, right? Kai, what do you think about that?
I'm going to defer to Hadassah because we haven't heard it yet.
How can I say no to that? What is being said is resonating in such a deep way, especially that question about Jessica Krug. And I think in the past there was this thing about the way, like if there was this pushback against using our nation language in literature. But I think now the danger is that it could be that we're being forced to become caricatures of ourselves in this type of performance, in the way, you know, we write. It might be said, I mean, we know what we're doing, but somebody else might be like, well, it's not enough, or it's not, well, for lack of a better word, Caribbean enough or ethnic enough. So definitely when it comes to what you said, Kadala, about motivation, why you're using the language in this way. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to represent? What are you, how, as Kai mentioned, how are you dignifying your characters? And this is a lesson I had to learn pretty early at a workshop. I wrote something and immediately I was called out on it. It was like, why are you doing this? Why are you treating your character in this way? You have to challenge and be clear about how you represent not only your character, but the authenticity of, you know, the culture, the language that you're using. So, yeah.
I was muted. I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, that is a good point. And, you know, for me, listening to everyone here speak, I realize that there is the political comes after, like you're aware of it, but you're not really writing to it. That's not the rhythm you're going with. You go with your own thing, and then it falls where, you know, it falls where it falls. You need to live this truth that you are putting down on the page. So Hadassah, you know, coming back to you, how much of a role does it play for you? How much of a role does political play for you? Because when your first response to that question, you know, you talked about, you know, a caricature, and that is in itself a political concept. Where do I fit in this, you know, milieu? And you are fully aware of the impact of making your characters do certain things. It's clear that you're aware of that. So how much of a role does it play for you?
I think that about it being political, I think it comes after. I think I try to focus more on why I'm doing what I'm doing. And there's a part maybe in the subconscious back of my mind while I'm writing, though it's not fully present, that, okay, even though, you know, we talked, I mean, from the sphere that, you know, the rest of the panel lives abroad and I am here in the Caribbean, it is easy to put on. I mean, I have a day job. I'm supposed to present myself in a certain way, and that could also filter as to what is correct and in the way that I write. But it's not something that I think is at the forefront. I try to be true to the character, to the situation, and maybe as I'm rereading, as I'm revising, I think about, you know, making sure that character is dignified, that we are, that what I'm saying, that what is in my head is really on the page, really. So yeah.
Yeah, but even if we don't go for the political, you know, the political comes for us sometimes. And the truth of the matter is that as there's a move to make things more inclusive, and everybody has a diversity and inclusion department, and it's all about different identities and different voices. In the publishing process, does anybody feel as though, and this is good, we're going to come across a little strange at first, but you have to let me explain, as though you are being put in there as a form of tolerance, right? Because I'm seeing questions coming up in the chat, like, do publishers push back on Caribbean English, or have you chosen publishers that are friendlier to Caribbean languages? As writers, how much do you think about marketability of your work when deciding what languages to use to build your stories? That's from Nadine, right? So do you feel like you, one, as Hadassah brought up before, have to write in a certain way to fit, because this is where, you know, your kind of writing, where you come from in the world belongs? Or do you feel like you have to fight to get that voice out? Or do you feel like that voice gets out because we've come to a place where why people just have to say, well, yeah, they belong, and so let's give them a space. It could be any one of those, or it could be something else. How do you feel like your process has been? Elizabeth, we can start with you.
Sure. I just wanted to say, as Cordella had said earlier about just being and using her use of nation language and just the act of being. That's how I approach my process. And I don't, so to answer the question, the short answer is no, I don't approach my process with thinking of accessibility for outsider readers. I don't approach the process thinking about accessibility for even the editors who are going to review it. Now, in terms of how that's actually received, editors love a glossary, and I push back on the glossary all the time. They love a glossary, but for the most part, I haven't had significant pushback in that way. In terms of the other side, which you were speaking of, I think you were kind of referring to a sort of form of tokenism. I can't say that I've experienced that with my publisher or any others that I've worked with sincerely, but I think in certain spaces, for example, in a lot of South Asian spaces, they're trying to kind of grab on, and surely sincerely in some instances, but in other cases, not really, to have some tokenism of some Indo-Caribbean voices. And it's very clear when that's the case, right? Because as I said, when you're a writer who approaches your writing from the perspective of just being and putting on the paper your reality as opposed to a filtered reality of what you think will get you the byline, right? It's very clear in feedback. There's a lot of red, right? There's a lot of red that comes back on the page. And I've experienced this much more not in larger publishing houses, but in a lot of smaller South Asian spaces that are trying to make room for Indo-Caribbean voices. But nonetheless, the process has not changed for me. And I think that's an important point when you're writing for a certain audience and you're committed to writing to that audience. It becomes, for me, it has become a struggle choosing platforms, especially in terms of distribution versus how much of the voice can I retain. So.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a sense have a similar sense in terms of, choice of platform, or do you just, go where you're welcome? Katya.
You can tell that I'm a teacher, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
But I'm interested in Patricia Powell. She said something a little while ago that really hit me. She said that when she was writing and using a lot of the heritage language, that you had to clean it up. You remember saying that? And I'm kind of lucky because I'm with Akashic Books. My last, my 2 books were published by Akashic Books, and they just love us, the Caribbean. But I'm really interested in what Patricia, when you said, you know what? I was using this language. And first of all, I'm loving everything that you've said, and you haven't said much. But I love the part about when you're laying down, and that's when you're getting really close to the collective grandmas. Oh, I love that. But can you please tell us what you mean when you said that, when you had to write the language that you felt like you had to clean it up? And all I could think of was, is our language dirty? Like I took it there. So please talk to us.
This was early on, I don't know how it is now, but this was early on when I first started writing. And my very first book, Benign Trial, which the version that exists now is not the original version I had written. And I remember for many years, I kept some of those letters I received from publishers, they couldn't imagine more than 10 people reading this. They can't imagine an audience for this work. And so I really had to think about how to make it accessible, how to hold on to as much of it as I could and still make it accessible. Like I had to think about, you know, that a balance really. And I think with each book I get sort of closer to something that is okay with me. But you know, that was the initial pushback. But the truth is that I can't not write nation language in some form, because I am writing about people I love. And when you know, all my characters are Caribbean people, even if they're imagined. And my novels are set there, or they're set in different places, but they're about Black people in the Caribbean, and or about Caribbean people. And I love them. Like when I'm writing them and connecting with them, I am feeling the familiarity, I'm feeling home, I'm feeling comfort, I'm feeling vulnerability. It's this language that is that opens up all those places in me in a way that when I'm sitting at the computer and doing my other work in formal English, I don't have that kind of love or that kind of ease, or that, you know, I feel like I'm really moving or traversing, as you say, Katia, through these different landscapes. But I do recognize that, you know, what I create is very different from what the reader experiences. I imagine that the reader experiences, you know, like resistance, or a sense of hybridity, or the reader gets a sense of, oh, this is what happened in this country, there was an encounter. You know, all of that information is there in the Creole. But for me, when I'm writing, it really is, it's about the people and about my connection with them. And my task is to find the language that I feel is in balance, that can be accessible to outsiders, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So, you know, everyone has published and recognized and have some alarmingly good CVs. We also have me, and then we have Hadassah, who has just won an award. And when when they announced it, everybody clapped. And so we're gonna find out why she won the award, because she's good. She's gonna read a little bit for us now. And so I'm really excited to hear from you, Hadassah, and whenever you're ready, just take it away.
So, name of story is Vize, and a little about the title. As I was thinking about this panel, it's a term that I've heard growing up to describe going for your visa, your American visa. But for some strange reason, when I asked people around me, my peers, they didn't really know what I meant. So for a minute, I wasn't sure if I was using the right word. But talking to some of my parents and the older, they were like, "Yeah, this is a thing." So go ahead. So visa. By the time Franklin joined the line on the pavement outside the embassy, the sun was already bearing down like if it was midday, even though it was only 8:30 in the morning. Standing there, dressed in a long-sleeve shirt and tie, he didn't take no horrors when people heckled him and the other hopefuls as they passed by. Watch how they line up begging to go in and live in people country now. Franklin couldn't speak for anybody else in the line, but he personally had no intention to overstay the time in that catch-ass place. He just wanted to see if the place looked the same way in real life, to see if everything on TV was true, and of course, to see his cousin get married. So he remained in the line, head high, confident about his chances and his place in the world. But after 15 minutes of the sun tearing into his face and beads of sweat settling into the tight space between his shirt collar and neck, the folder with all his documents barely covered his face, and he started to shrink against the concrete wall. One by one, they inched through the gates, and a few shuffles later, Franklin made it to the head of the line. The guard checked his name off the list, checked him for any sharp objects or concealed weapons, then invited him to step inside through the metal detectors. When he entered the building, he realized that the same warm air he left outside was waiting for him inside. And he started to wonder about this country and its people, who didn't even see it fit to at least offer people some cool breeze in this heat, especially since everyone had to pay a non-refundable application fee of $700. And because he stood there wondering, he was left standing as everyone else rushed to find a seat among the brightly colored plastic chairs, the luckier ones getting a seat in the path of one of the industrial-sized fans which dominated each corner of the room. He had a 9 o'clock appointment, and according to the large clock which hung above the counters, he had a 15-minute wait. But soon 9 o'clock came and went, then 9:30, then 10:15, and no one from either counter A, B, C, or D had called his name. There was an order here that he did not understand. Some who arrived after him were called forward, and when that happened, he and all those who were waiting before only shifted in annoyance, because everyone there knew, without anybody having to tell them, that no matter what, you could never raise your voice in the embassy. Oh. So I just,
Wow, 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 wow.
the
Okay.
rest of it is online, so didn't want to go through the whole thing.
But you should have, because it's so good. All right. Yeah, the questions, I'm thinking about the questions that we're getting in the chat while you're reading. And somebody just said, loved it, Hadassah, because it really is, it does a very good job of capturing, that experience that we have all had. Everybody, we've all had it. But one of the things that struck me is, you said there was an order here that he did not understand. And that not only does that speak volumes, but it seems like just plain English. But in between, sandwiched in between the way you constructed what came before and what you constructed after, it didn't just sound like plain English. It told me something other than what it would tell me if it were in somebody else's writing. So, thank you for that. It's beautifully written. And we have a lot of questions coming in. And one of those questions is about how we deal with teaching English, because we have some teachers here. How do we deal with teaching English, like the sentence in its raw form that Hadassah just read, at the same time teach people to respect the nation language? Like, why are we teaching them English if like plain standard English? Let me just read the person's thing the way it's written, because I don't want to get in any trouble. So, how does one teach the standard English to would-be writers in primary and high school, and then of course university, but still instill respect for the dialect? And that's from Heather Archibald. One of the teachers, anyone? Katia, there you are.
I'm a teacher, and that question is it's over here. I raised my hand because I just want to give one of these to Miss Hadassah for her beautiful work. That's it. All of you other brilliant people can figure out that answer, but Hadassah, that's all I can say. And that's a secret drum speak.
Yeah, that is a secret drum speak. I think anybody who is from the Caribbean who has had to line up in an embassy. I mean, even when you're not in your own country, you go to another country and you see the embassy wall, your heart starts to do a funny thing, because you feel like, oh gosh, do I have to go in? It's a very interesting phenomenon. You captured it really well. But Miss Archibald's question has not been answered. So how are we going to deal with the teaching of English and the respect for the dialect?
I find that if the question is about teaching children in school, and I'm assuming it is, I find that children are they're very, very creative. They're very near to creative writing. You teach them creative writing, a lot happens there, because they are going to have to, do their characters authentically. They're going to have to make those characters speak. They're going to have to make those characters represent, something that that they know, kind of. And in other words, I don't think, at the higher levels, you can tell them about the very different grammars of the languages. You can tell them, show them how the Creole is structured, the language, and so on. But little children in school, I think you allow them to express themselves in their own language, even when it's like it's like having a bilingual classroom. But I always have found, from my own experience, that if you teach them creative writing, they fall in love with their own language consciously.
And there's another question, and it's directed very specifically to the Jamaican writers.
I'm speaking out from the Jamaican aspect as well, particularly. Yes.
I'd love to hear Jamaican writers, in particular, about orthography and choices that you have to make when translating spoken Jamaican English or patois on the page. Things like grammar or choice between more authentic spelling versus English orthography. Thanks. Jamaican writers. Do you have to make these choices? And, how do you go about making the choices? How do you translate on the page?
I use a number of strategies, and I was interested when Patricia said that, she's become more comfortable with where she's arrived as she's gone on, because I've made different choices over time. I don't try to make it look like Creole on the page in terms of how I spell and so on. I work with the grammar. So that's why I say, if you listen, once you start reading it, you realize that you have to hear, because you're dealing with a different language altogether. And sometimes I will deliberately do a sentence. It's sort of this Jamaican continuum where we switch a lot. I might do a sentence that starts off in English, and then it just segues into Creole grammar. So you realize that you're inhabiting this hybrid space in a way. But I don't, but I think that even for our own readers, trying to do it like, sort of Cassidy and LePage, where you're actually making it look as, like phonetic spelling, it slows people down because they're not used to reading that. And I think you can get the best of two worlds by extending the accessibility and yet keeping the authentic language. And it's interesting, there was one where you were reading an English language piece, and but you said duster, and that already is a cause a thing. As I said, nobody speaks your language the way you do it, because it changes into the culture into which it is given, so it's going to be a different thing altogether. But yes, I do think about it consciously when I'm crafting Creole sentences. And if I want, for some reason, to make it really, really like what we call country Creole, like what I did in my last book was I would have the person say, because I've used different kinds of Creole. So the people who live in really rural Jamaica, who, is very, very African in terms of the grammar, I just put a translation beside it, but I don't translate it into English, I translate it into a kind of more creolized rhythm, which is accessible to any audience, but I cheat a bit because it's not a word for word translation. I always put something else in there that becomes almost occult, there's, I put some hurricane, you might say that, so something else is added into the translation. Yeah, so that's how I handle it.
Yeah,
and I hate glossaries as well. I don't want any publisher ever again who makes me do a glossary, which my first publisher did. Yeah.
So that's 2 glossaries gone there. We don't expect to see 2 glossaries. Patricia's going to respond to the question and then tell us if she will
I
ever.
was just thinking also, like, just with syntax too, like words that are missing, and then it breaks up the rhythm of the,
Yes.
where you're going, as opposed to where are you going,
Yes.
and stuff like that. Yeah, it's been interesting over the years trying to find, and I feel like with each book it's been different, but trying to find this comfort level with what I'm okay with, and how the audience will receive it. I was also thinking about this idea of talking drum, I think is the term. And Katia, how you were doing all these different things with and how, we have to record this language too, because it's impossible to sort of capture that on the page, like all of those things that you were doing, Katia, with the and how alive and rich the language is. And I'm really happy that that we're all writing at these different, we're all writing the dialect in all these different ways. And I like that.
Kai, do you have a similar experience in terms of the translation, or you just let it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of struggle with the question because probably like Cordella, there's so many options that the bad way to approach it is to think that, okay, now I'm using Creole, or now I'm using dialect, or now I'm using nation language. When more honestly, it's now I am using this version of the dialect, or now I'm using this dialect or that dialect. Like, we work with language, and language is broad, and it never feels like a binary choice for me. It's I even resist the idea of when my writing students tell me that they're looking for their voice, and I'm like, no, you are a writer, you have several voices. If you are content with one voice, that's a problem. We have voices, we tap into voices, we tap into registers, and that means that the choices are various as well. Earlier you're asking about, when we kind of speak around and we're speaking a kind of secret language. And again, I think that happens to such a kind of wild extent when we write, because just myself, I belong to so many communities, and so there will be jokes. If I read through the book, there will be something that only the Jamaican reader will understand, or there is something else that only the Caribbean reader will understand. That's a kind of broader community, or there is some weird pun in there that only someone who did a PhD in literature would understand. We are speaking to so many communities at the same time, and that's what language is. It's when do you have access to what community, and when are you speaking slyly to which of those communities? And all of those are different creoles and different dialects that we speak individually, but we're all layering it under that quote unquote one language that we're writing in. So it's just a very multifaceted, a very dynamic experience for me. So I use several creoles, I use several dialects, and the skill of writing is to merge all of that under the English for me.
The skill of writing is to merge that under the English. Wow. That is definitely quotable. So I have a question for Elizabeth, but I also have multiple texts in the chat elsewhere on my phone, because somebody must read at least 3 minutes. They've asked for somebody must read, right? So people are interested in hearing reading. Now, I don't know how we're going to divvy this last 5 minutes up. Katia, are you going to read?
No, I just muted myself. A couple of weeks ago, teacher, please, I woke up thinking about a poem by Kai Miller.
Boom.
And I remember talking to Marsha about it, saying, what is that poem when he talks about, and
the dirty wine girl who died?
Yes. How do you know?
Because I've watched all my videos, I do my research. That's how I know.
Because I and I woke up and I was like, what is that poem? And when we're talking about proper language, it's kind of like those words don't belong in this heaven. Do you see what I mean? And Kai, I wrote too much. I was like, what is that poem? So
Kai, is that poem available?
I'm gonna unmute myself now because all I do is cause trouble.
Is that something that's possible for us folk
Oh,
here?
I'd have to look it up. Huh?
come on, it's the girl that died and went to heaven and she couldn't.
Yeah, but I can't remember it offhand.
But how long it'll take to
I have
look?
to search for it.
How long it'll take to look up though?
Well, go on, talk and me look.
Right, we'll talk and we'll look. We're waiting for you. So just give me a hand when you're ready. Do a Katia and raise your hand. Okay?
Let me just disappear so you don't break the flow of me getting up and going to the shelf.
Go look for it. We're waiting. But
Yeah.
before, so we're gonna talk about one more thing because Elizabeth, I just wanna, ask you, because I was reading the interaction between Liz and Melissa in trauma, right? And we haven't been able to talk about all the other things about the Caribbean. We talk about nation language and how we communicate with each other, but we haven't really talked about how other people see us, their perception of us, and how our lived reality might be very, very different. But there's a very interesting piece, and I'm just going to read it for you. Liz and Melissa are having a conversation, right? Well, it's about Liz and Melissa, and they had basically just put a customer in place. They were both cashiers, and they put the customer in place because the customer was rude and racist, and they just fed up, right? So they did it. And basically they move forward now and they're a little bit older. And they said, now we're both in our 20s and no longer angsty teens with passions as raging as our acne. We found the proper balance is lower volume, a slightly lighter sprinkling of the F-bomb, and a lot more wine to deal with the aggravation of having to choke down the very honest words that people deserve to hear. And what struck me thinking about nation language is the idea of honest words. Does Kai have honest words for us? Are you here with honest words? Are you here? Not yet. He's still looking. But the idea that nation language is honest, that is what it is, that in this whole, jumble of various voices and the way that people speak, nation language comes from the heart of the Caribbean writer and from the heart of the Caribbean. So Elizabeth, can you just quickly before Kai is ready, just do you think that this is what you're there to do? Basically speak the honest language of the Caribbean.
I would like to think that is what I'm here to do. I think a lot of my writing is dealing with different versions of truth and different versions of honesty. And since now I like that we've had this common thread of the drum language. And I think what has been most challenging for me in terms of identity and in terms of writing and process, and I'm sure many writers of mixed identities feel this way, is translating many different drums kind of pittering and banging all around you, right? So I have, nation language and kind of what I've grown up with at home, but I'm also of Indo-Caribbean, mixed race, part Indo-Caribbean. I have a lot of, our language has, little tidbits of Bhojpuri. I'm also a Muslim woman. That's that's a whole other drum there that also I try my best to translate into my writing. So really what I'm doing in my process, in addition to what, that pursuit of honesty, and I think for me that pursuit of honesty is trying to make music with all of these drums and all of these instruments that kind of exist very naturally for me in my life, but I realize when trying to explain it on paper, it's noise. So what's music to me in all the conflicting drums is really comes out as noise, and which is why I think it's been, as you said, in kind of that pursuit of honesty, it's really just been for me, maybe it's not about making it into a song, maybe it is about just presenting that noise, and that noise is the truth.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So have you found the poem that was requested by?
I found the book that contains the poem that was requested.
Huh?
But I'm not going to read that poem.
You were doing something else?
Yeah, I'm going to read a slightly shorter poem that is exactly about the theme of what we're discussing.
Fantastic.
So it just feels a little more appropriate.
Just so that we know, we are about to go over time. So what I'm going to do is you're going to read the poem, take your time, and then I'm going to thank you and hand over to the super host. Yes, Katya, before I do that.
Hi, what is
So please take it away.
that's our secret language, okay? Jessica, good.
The metalexical term of the Sakti. So I'll just say, Guyanese people won't understand this. Jamaicans get this. So the background to this poem is that American evangelists, and that's what the poem is called. It's called What the Evangelist Should Have Said. And when American evangelists came to Jamaica, they would always give this metaphor that, you know, salvation was like Jesus on one side of the river, you on the other, and Jesus lifts to pull you over the river. And when I was growing up, I always thought, but why don't you just jump? Because Jamaican rivers are really small. So this didn't make any sense. What the evangelist should have said. An American evangelist preaching salvation said it was like being on one side of a river, Jesus on the other, arms long as forever reaching to lift you over. But we only knew Hope River, Sally Waters River. We only knew rambling brooks running through the cane as river, a thing you could jump over or make a way across on stones. We had no imagination of Mississippi, where rivers so wide they held ships. A savior with magic arms was pointless. What the evangelist should have said was, it's like when the river come down just like so, and you find yourself at the bottom, slow breathing under the surface, speaking in bubbles, growing accustomed to fish and deep and dark and forever. Salvation is the man with arms like a tractor who reaching for pull you out of the river. Press the flat of him hands against your belly and push the river out of you.
Wow.
That's it.
That's great. You know, one of the things that I have always loved, and you talked about different audiences, you talked about Jamaicans getting some things, and then you talked about the Caribbean getting some things. One of the things I've always loved about the way people who come from Jamaica speak is the word so. Nobody else does that. So and E, right? She's strong E. Like that, I don't know what it doesn't come from me naturally, but when I hear it, it just makes me feel like I'm in the right place, like I'm safe, you know? And so that has really been wonderful to listen to. I'm really grateful to have been a part of this conversation. You know, I honestly don't feel like I deserve to be here, but you guys are fantastic. The work is fantastic. I have read and am reading it. And as a transplant in the United States who has to grapple with all kinds of things that I don't have the vocabulary for, I need to just reassure you that you are giving me the vocabulary to express what comes from the Caribbean in this place. And it really does make a huge difference. You know, I have a lot of words because that's what I deal with every day. But I know that there are people who don't have the words and who get the words from you. And those words really make a difference when we wake up in the morning and have to face, you know, situations that we really don't belong in sometimes, situations that we don't understand, but we can interpret through the nation language that you provide us with. So I'm really pleased to have been here. And I'm just really immensely grateful to be able to have conversations with you, because where else would this happen, right? And Hadassah, you know, thanks for reading. That was absolutely amazing. And I look forward to whatever it is you do next. So Nicole is here. She just appeared out of nowhere. Her little Brady Bunch square has appeared on the screen. It means that I get to say bye-bye for now, and she gets to, you know, to wrap up. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't hear you.
Unmute, yes. I was saying thank you,
Okay.
Nayat,
Thank
you
you.
know, for leading our esteemed panel on that engaging discussion on the use of Creole and Nation language. I feel like we could have really, you know, had another hour of this discussion, right? We kind of just scratched the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, you know, but I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, personally, to each of the panelists for all that they've shared through their works and just through general discourse. I feel like a prominent theme that emerged, kind of pulling together so much that was shared today, is this idea of authenticity, right? And in the words of those present themselves, it's just, you know, us reminding ourselves to avoid the trap of the binary, right? And to ensure that our work continues to reflect, you know, us speaking in all of our voices, right? And the fact that we should, first of all, that you should be, you know, applauded for the courage to write, you know, and write fiercely using nation language, because yes, there are publishers who will publish those voices, and there are young writers looking at your work, being inspired to continue writing and write in the ways that you have shown how to do it so beautifully. So I want to say again, thank you for, you know, leading us on this conversation to wrap up the final event of the BCLF 4-day extravaganza. Viewers, I know from the chat on Facebook and Zoom that you have been really, really engaged and incredibly happy to hear from some of your favorite authors across the board. So thank you for joining us. You know, again, I said we're wrapping up this journey, right? So if we want to kind of recap the festivities that have, you know, unfolded over these past couple of days, you know, on Thursday when we jumped off, you know, we started basically paying tribute to the literary giant Paul Marshall, right? And then we transferred that discussion to talking about happily ever after in Caribbean fiction, you know, what that means. And then we took a nice little segue on day 2 into highlighting authors who published this year and of all years, who were able to publish works in 2020 and provide them a platform to share their incredible stories. And then we wrapped up Friday night with a real Shop talk with this incredible lineup of poets and oral storytellers who just wowed everybody, and with, you know, with all the banter and the jokes and the charisma. Saturday, we had a lovely conversation on Caribbean masculinity, stewarded by an incredible panel of talented male writers. And then last night, we kind of ended on a musical vibes. So we had authors take us on a cathartic journey through the use of Caribbean music, right? And the stories that are told through the sounds of the Caribbean. And of course, today, we started things off, you know, as we walked through the valley of magic and wonder and fantasy. And now we've wrapped things up so nicely, talking about the use of our language and the way that we tell our stories. So how do we continue to share these stories in an authentic way and spread the love? Well, of course, the first thing you have to do is buy books. Buy the books of the writers present today, this session, every session. We're going to be dropping that bookstore link again. We've been dropping it all weekend because we want you to support our incredible talent who's representing the culture so well across the globe. Right now, we have people joining us from all parts of the diaspora. So we're so grateful for that. So again, make sure that you are checking out that bookshop.org link. That's going to be appearing very, very soon. And of course, we were able to do this so wonderfully, so beautifully on behalf of the team because of community and partnership and support. So I want to take this moment to make sure that we thank from the bottom of our hearts, and I know that BCLF will do this also as a wrap up, to thank all of our festival media partners and sponsors, including the Center for Fiction, Carry On Friends, Prelit, BK Reader, Literary Freedom Project, Book Things TT, Caribiz Network, New York Carib News, and Callaloo Box. All right, don't forget also, follow the festival page and keep following, because it's just more vibes will continue to be shared on the BCLF platform, Facebook, the website, Instagram. That's Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. All right, we're gonna drop that tag in the link as in the chat as well, so that you guys know where you're supposed to be and who you're supposed to be following all the time for this kind of vibes. And I want to just wrap up and end by saying thank you all. The honor was truly mine being your super host. You know, I think it's been a while since I've been in a space where for the first time in a long time, I just really didn't feel that bright because I was surrounded by so many brilliant people. And I have so much more to learn. So I want to thank you for even the personal inspiration and the inspiration I know that you have lent to our viewers. And with that, I bid you farewell. Thank you so much. And I would like to pass off the floor to the BCLF team to close off the final day of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Good evening, everyone. My name is Melanie Painter, better known as the Fixer on the BCLF team. The task for this virtual event was literally behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly, fixing everything that could go wrong. And the task that was. When Marsha and I started this discussion on creating this festival 2.5 years ago, I jumped right on, not seeing at the time the depth of what this would turn out to be. 2 years in, and the pride I feel for my Caribbean heritage becomes critical in this moment in 2020, as we join in the collective awareness of each other and demand to be respected as we stand side by side. None of us could have predicted what this year has brought thus far, but we continue to forge ahead and break barriers. And that's why it was important that we, the BCLF team, continue what we started last year, even in the midst of the pandemic, because there's nothing like a meeting of Caribbean minds. We spent the last 4 days listening to stories that transported us back to our childhoods, took us on adventures, stories that inspired, enticed, and forced us to question our existence in life. Some of us even motivated to leave here and embark on new writing careers. At times, I felt I was in a rum shop, chopping up on social issues, at the times at the library with friends, discussing our favorite parts of a newly released book, but overall in an arena somewhere celebrating my Caribbean people and their brilliance. At the core of our mission is to support and facilitate vibrant conversations about Caribbean identity, and we have achieved that. This could not have been possible without you, the writers, sharing your stories, and you, the readers, who make the connections to the experiences and emotions that the authors write about. I think what is most important as we depart today and continue on our separate journeys is to continue to live life on our own terms, continuing to elevate our culture and everything we stand for without fear of or concern of criticism, because it's only in our authenticity that we can stay true to our original identity. We are Caribbean, unique, multidimensional, full of flavor, and saucy as hell. Let me take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us for this 4-day Caribbean literary party. We absolutely needed this break. A special thank you to Dr. Nicole Grimes for being the hostess with the mostest for 3 of the 4 days. I also want to say thanks to all the sponsors and partners who so willingly contributed in various ways to make this happen. Last but not least, I want to say a huge thank you to my fellow BCLF teammates. And if I get a little emotional, this happens every year, who I'm so grateful to have in this movement because we jive so well. It is very rare that I find a team where everyone works so seamlessly together. And if I don't say it enough, I appreciate and love you all. At this time, I would love Marsha, Melissa, Christopher to join me on screen to say a few words and take a final toast to BCLF 2020. Are they coming? They want to say something.
Oh yeah, sorry, we coming to come.
Oh, let's together again.
There you go, Marsha. What I want to say is congratulations to you guys. This was, I told you, I told you.
We did.
This is just a phenomenal movement. Melanie just called it. And this is just the beginning. And I'm so excited. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mel has done a fantastic job of, oh God, Mel, you said everything. I just want to say that this has been a really difficult year for everyone. You know, COVID-19 and the BLM or Black Lives Matter have really tested all of us. And if I and the team has to look for the life raft that has pulled us through, it would be our stories, it would be our community, because we had no choice. We just had to be with each other, right? And what did we speak in? And without a censor, without a filter, when nobody else was around, it's our language, right? Like I felt close to home, I can't go home. And so we eat pilau and we lapse into that natural language that then inoculates us from everything else that's outside. So at this point, what I want to do is extend a branch of invitation to writers, creatives, to get in contact with us. It's an old African proverb that talks about going far with a group, but if you want to go fast, go by yourself. That's what the BCLF is also founded on. I want to thank the community who trusts us to represent us in our best light authentically and responsibly. And to the individuals who are far-flung in the diaspora, if you want to support our work, what you can do is just buy a book. Literally, there's no festival without the writer, and there's no writer without the community. And everybody needs to go out and buy a book. And if you can't buy a book, form a writing pod. And if you can't form a reading pod or a writing pod, buy a book and call a friend and tell somebody else, right? Yesterday we learned, on Friday, we learned how to beat algorithms. So add TBRs on your Goodreads and sign up for Goodread accounts, because we can use the tech to push Caribbean culture to virtual trending lists. But more importantly, as we've done over the last few days, use our language. That is the key for our natural selection. That's how we're going to survive. That's how we're going to thrive. That's how we're going to adapt. Our islands matter. Our culture matters. It's more important than Netflix and Hulu and Vudu and whatever all those other things are, because I don't watch TV. But I urge all of you, again, please go out and buy the book. If you can, buy it from an independent bookseller. If you can, buy it from a Black-owned bookshop. If you have to, buy it from Amazon, whatever, right? But buy a book. There's no festival without the writers. I cannot tell you how much it means to have new and classic faces and just established writers who said yes. Who said yes, and because of you, we are. So thank you. I love all of you. That's all I gotta say, which is about that. She's crying. I don't. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to all the panelists, hosts, super hosts, Hadassah, Stephanie, keep writing. Excellent. We wish you all the best. Melanie started just crying again. All we could ask is that we hold on to our culture. This COVID has just brought everybody closer. It makes me miss my family in Trinidad more and more and more every single day. And quite honestly, our stories are escapes. So keep writing, keep informing us, keep helping us stay as a unit. Thanks. He's just gonna make something to eat because he never talks. He just cooks.
Oh gosh, look at Melanie. Everybody's just, you guys are doing a great job.
As Marsha said, I'm not a man of many words, but I'd just like to toast these three women. Just looking at them and all the effort they put into it, it's remarkable. And we need more of this. And I just want to thank everyone. Until next year.
Till next year.
We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Right. You have a little tune to go out with, Marsh?
Oh, Nicole, have a nice tune. Let me get the woman on the bass now.
We're not with woman on the bass, y'all. Strong.
Till later. Bye.
Bye.
I don't want to go.
Katya want to lime all you.
I gotta go do laundry.
But Nicole.
Marsha.
Yes, ma'am.
Marsha, if you're gonna go out, you're going out with music, right? Is that it?
Maria, thanks, a baby.
You're going out with music, is that it?
Yes, we're going out with Woman on the Bass by All Stars.
Well, let me do my going home song.
Thank you. Okay, no problem. We're going out with music with Katya.
Okay.
Hold on.
Slowly, can you hear me?
We can.
Softly, the rain calls to mind a familiar melody. It's seducing me unrelentingly. And I know this time it's gonna take me home again. Yes, I know it. It's gonna take me all the way. I hear the beat of those distant drums calling. They remind me of the way things used to be. You feel that? Like magic in the moonlight. The rhythm precedes me, leading the way to the place where I was born. It's taking me home to those distant drums. Yeah, see the drums?
Thank you.